Hi, my name is Peter Moe and I am from Tourism Ireland's Nordic office in Copenhagen, and we will be talking about one of the most Irish traditions, Halloween. Therefore, I'm joined by Clodagh Doyle, keeper at the Irish Folklife Division in the National Museum of Ireland. So, hi Clodagh.
Hi Peter, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Not bad, not bad. We've got nice weather at the moment, so I don't know what for the next hour or maybe.
All right, well then let's get on with this so you can go out and enjoy it, hey? So can you tell me a bit about what you do and the museum?
Well, I studied Irish folklore and archaeology, but now I get to work with the Irish Folklife collection, which is the normal people's everyday objects from the last 150 years. So it's really an ethnographical collection and basically an Irish objects associated with our culture. And I work in the National Museum for the last 25 years, and now I'm the keeper of this collection. So I'm the manager of that collection, and I'm based in Mayo in the west of Ireland, not in Dublin where the most of the National Museum is. So it's nice, I'm out in the countryside.
So our listeners have to go to County Mayo to come and see real Irish traditions come to life, yes. I guess. Nice. Yeah. And speaking of Irish traditions, is it true that Halloween is originally an Irish tradition? Because I always associate it with it being American.
Oh, yeah, definitely Irish, but really it's Celtic. It's a Celtic festival. And we, in Ireland, we're probably the insular Celts. We're the most ingrained Celts, and then there's European Celts, and they kind of merged with other people, but we were probably more isolated, especially being on an island. So yes, it survives, a Celtic tradition survives longest and strongest in Ireland. And then it goes to America, the idea of it. Yeah, so it's not an American festival, but it is a Celtic festival and an Irish one.
Interesting. Okay. So how do we then celebrate Halloween in Ireland? How is it done? How was it done? I gotta say, and how do you do it now? Maybe.
It's still done. Really, it's really one of the strongest surviving of our festivals. And the fact is, it's really, really ancient, and it's probably going back to much more pagan times. And I'm sure it's very similar for your Norse audience that the idea of the seasons and the year was so important to communities in our previous ancestors. And, it was really important to kind of look to the weather, the seasons, the land. And so people they were much more aware of what was going on. But the biggest thing in the Celtic year would have been two halves, the dark half and the light half. And the dark half starts on the 1st of November. And that would have been traditional in Nordic traditions as well, to have that two halves of the year, brighter days and darker days. So so Halloween is the evening before the 1st of November. And it's kind of knowing that it's the time you're coming into really dark days, dark nights and short days. And people kind of know that that's the end of summer. And that's what Samhain means. It's the old word for Halloween. It's Samhain, and it means end of summer.
So Samhain.
Samhain, yeah.
Samhain,
so,
okay.
And we call the night before that, we call it Iha Hauna, which is the genitive of night of Samhain. So the night beforehand is Iha Hauna.
So Samhain is basically a passage festival going from the light to the dark.
That's it. And the end of it's a kind of coming in at the harvest. So it's the end of you've got everything in that the land can give you. You've picked every berry, you've got all your, apples, you've got your nuts, you've got anything you could forage is off the land, and that you need to put it all away for the winter, and then you are stocked up for the winter, and you
have a lot of surplus at that time.
Yeah, exactly. And so you've got this big surplus of things, and that's why a lot of the time in Halloween we associate it with apples and nuts, and people going around collecting apples and nuts, but also for a little party, but also lots of games with apples and nuts, you know, lots of bobbing for apples, putting that's apples in a tub of water, and you kind of have to put your hands behind your back and try and take it out with just your mouth, you know, things like that. Probably fun. Things, yeah, a lot of games, and maybe an apple on a string and two people trying to get that, and it's swinging like a pendulum and you're trying to get it and not hit yourself in the face, but you need to get a bite of the apple. So that's some of the games that are played, you know, and still are, mind you. Yeah, mind you, in COVID times, I'm just not sure whether any of the games can go ahead, you know.
Well, I mean, if you follow the restrictions and you do it with, don't do it with a stranger on the street, but probably you could do it with your close family that you see all the time. Anyway, how did Halloween then become this scary tradition that we know today?
You know, nature is dying and everything on the land is dying. And I suppose that's the sign that it was kind of a darkness, this dark season is coming in, but it's kind of associated with death. Because you've got that death on the land, people remember the dead. And, you know, that's it. Yeah, it's associated with death, and that's where death kind of comes in.
So the death of the land, the changing season, and then the remembrance of probably who's been lost in the past. So that's how Halloween became scary. Is that it? Or that's...
It is because I suppose, you know, people were celebrating their dead, and I suppose Celtic people didn't really quite believe that when you were gone, you were really gone. You were just in another world. So you were in an other world. The dead were in an other world, and that there were connectors between this world and that world and other worlds. And often druids and different people would be the connectors that could infiltrate those and find those connections. But the fact was that people really believed that at the time where there was a season change, it's quite a monumental time. So they feel that there's a kind of, every time there was a seasonal change, the evening before was quite superstitious. People were very superstitious, and they believed that you were much more in tune with the other world at this time, because you're in a liminal place. So you're not quite in winter and you're not quite in autumn. You're in this kind of in-between time.
Yeah, the in-between, the transition times. I think as well in the Nordics, but most folk history, they have this, it's always the thing when it's transition, everything crosses over. So dead, living, like the spirits, everything is crossing over. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's like when you would celebrate St. John's Eve. You don't celebrate St. John's Day, which would be obvious. You know, why not the day? You know, why not his feast day on the 24th of June? Why are you doing it on the 23rd and having your bonfire then? Because the fact is, it's always the eve. It's always that eve is really important. But there's a huge amount of superstition as well. And because people were connecting with the dead and they believed that they had an opportunity to come back. So sometimes people left out a meal positively and left something nice for the person, their dearly departed one, maybe left some food out, you know, something on the table for them. So there was an idea that you wanted your departed people to come back and feel welcome. So that belief was there, and the belief that the dead, but then people believe the dead are kind of walking around and on the move. And I suppose that's where we get this scary element, because there's a feeling then, well, if they're scary and, you know, if you're out and about and it's really, really dark countryside, you don't want to bump into anyone on Halloween, because they could be a ghost or of a person who had died. Mm-hmm. But the thing was, even though it's positive in your own house, people knew that people were aware that the dead could be in limbo and might need to be traveling. So people decided, well, this is a good opportunity to scare the living daylights out of anybody. And
I mean, presumably there would also be a lot of food left outside.
Yeah, that's it. Well, not necessarily outside, inside, because our weather is so bad. But certainly the fact was that, you know, people knew that people are going to be worried and scared. So if you put on a scary costume and you've we'd no electricity in Ireland till the 50s and 60s. So and even now, it's really, really dark, but the countryside is dark. And, anything like that, there wouldn't have been major lights on in even houses. So everything could be very scary. But if you were out and about and somebody came in a white sheet and scared you, you'd be very scared,
That's true. I have a question, just because you mentioned that there was all this food that was set aside to the dead. Is that possibly where trick or treating came in?
Yeah, well, trick and treat is kind of because people were going from house to house, sometimes to scare people, but then it becomes more that the children go from house to house and they get a treat. And the treats would generally be bits of fruit or nuts, sweets now, of course. But in the past, it would have been just small little things. And children would say, when I grew up, I would say, have you anything to help the Halloween party? Which means give us some donation for the party I'm going to have later with my stash,
Well,
but
that's
the
fun.
thing about, that's the treat, okay? But the tricks, because people are kind of playing tricks on other people. A lot of the time they throw a cabbage at the door of someone's house and, and then somebody would open the door and there's nobody there, just a cabbage on the ground. And, or people do, we call it knickknacks, but it was when you actually went to somebody's door, knocked on it and ran away. Did you do that as a child?
No, I lived out in the country. It'd take too long to run away from the house.
That's funny. Well, yeah,
I mean, you'd be spotted. I mean, they'd just flash a light. You'd be running for a while before people would be able to see you.
But if you did it at night, you might have got away with it. But so at Halloween night, people would often do that. And then they would often as well play tricks on people. And, in communities, it was very important in communities to get married was really important because people wanted people to get married. If they didn't get married, it meant they weren't ensuring that the community thrived because there'd be more children. And we'd have a lot of villages in, say, Achill and County Mayo, deserted villages because they don't continue because the community doesn't continue. So there was a big emphasis on getting married, But the thing was, I suppose, the people who didn't get married were often the butt of the jokes. So they were the kind of the spinsters and bachelors who had not married were the people who often got the jokes played on them. So old man, whoever he is, he'd be the one you play the trick on. And sometimes there'd be tricks like, the man might have gone to the pub for some drink and he'd come home and his horse and cart had been dismantled and put between the fence, so he wouldn't understand how did that happen. How could that have happened? Things like that.
Let's leave the question: did it dismantle the fence first, or did they dismantle the horse and cart? Which is easiest? Yeah. It seems like a lot. That's incredible. That's a lot of work. That's effort put into a prank.
Yeah,
I wish I could do that.
Yes, just silly sort of mischievous things and sort of fun and pranks that are kind of silly and or even putting something and blocking someone's chimney so the smoke goes all the way down into the house and smokes them out, and silly things, but annoying things, and that's the mischief. So I would think that trick or treat, you want your treat because give me this or else you get a trick, and tricks wouldn't be so nice.
Get your cart dismantled and put back together inside a fence. Yeah, that's
yeah. And you just go around the town and just running and knocking on doors. That would be normal because people would be afraid of a knock on a door at the time, And so I suppose that is something about kind of the trick and treat element. And when I was telling you about the getting married was really important, that features so strongly in Halloween night. Halloween night is the time, because as you said, it's that in-between time. So you can foretell the future. It's much more of an opportunity for you to foretell the future at that time. So people really believed that, you could do things like, one of our big traditions would be the Barmbrack. You wonder what that is. Barm is a type
Barmbrack.
of Barmbrack. It's kind of like a cake. Basically, it's a cake. It's a speckled kind of cake made of malt, and it has lots of fruit in it. That's why it's speckled, and brack means speckled in Irish. So the boring brack is this cake, the speckled cake, and in that cake, besides all the dried fruit and the raisins and sultanas, there used to be always, they put in sheep owl ring, but the ring would be, say, the sort of rings that bulls would have, or a ring that a pig might have. So there's something like that. But anyway, people would put the ring.
The ones they have in the nose, kind of in the bulls and stuff, like in old movies, I guess. I don't think I've seen one actually.
Oh, I see them all the time locally. But a little ring anyway. And the thing is, or it could be made out of plaited straw, or we've one on display that's made out of plaited straw, and we've a small little metal one that would have gone through a pig's nose. But the thing is, those are the little rings that a ring would be in the cake. And the symbolism was that if you received that cake slice with the ring, you were due to marry within the year, So that was very important. And also in the cake, you might have a gold coin. And of course, there would be maybe a small bit of a rag, and that would mean that it was poverty, and that would be poor. Okay. Yeah. And then the other thing would be maybe a thimble to suggest that you're going to be a spinster and you're not going to get married. Yeah. A button, you're a bachelor, and like sometimes there was a crucifix in it to say that you're going to take up religious orders. And, and when you think about it, in Irish families, in very large families, often there was a priest, in the past.
Oh, right.
Not now. Yeah. So it wouldn't have been so odd. Yeah. And then sometimes there was a little stick put in it and a small little twig or something, and that meant you were going to be beaten by your spouse. Horrible.
Wow. I mean, we could probably figure out some new things to put inside a Barmbrack.
Barmbrack, yeah. It's brilliant. We could definitely. I think my children would like some games console or something, some
put a microchip in there. That's probably not a good idea either. But yeah,
it's strange. But sometimes the ring, if it wasn't in the Barmbrack, it might be in the potato dish that was eaten that night. So you've got a big, like with all festivals, you have a festive meal. So the meal would be usually potatoes, some sort of an apple or some nice berry dessert, because you've got all your fruit in. And
I could eat that now.
I know, with lovely cream. And so that is that they would have eaten the meal, then they would have had the cake, and then your future would be told. But other times people also just laid out blindfold games. So they played games where you put out maybe 3 saucers, and then the first saucer, which is a small little bowl, in the first bowl it would be water. The second one might be some grain or a coin, and the other one might be some clay or earth. And, and the thing was, you switch all the bowls around and you have to put out your hand and feel into one of those bowls. And if you put your hand in the clay, what do you think is going to happen?
I think you're going to be dead.
Exactly. Within the year, you're dead. And
very morbid.
The next thing, if you put it into the grain or the coin, of course, you'll have wealth and you're grand. Yeah. And then the one with water would have been emigration. You're going to go overseas. Right. And that would have been so much for us. I suppose as an island community, as an island, you're going to go away. But as we were saying, and there might be another bowl with a ring in it, but really
that makes sense.
There was a lot of other ones about that.
I'm assuming this is mostly played by people who aren't married, those games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Younger kids. And even when I was younger, any time I peeled an apple, which would be with my mom, she was really good at peeling an apple where she'd get the really, really long ribbon of peel, of skin. And if you threw it over your shoulder, it was meant to make a letter, and whatever letter it was the initials of the man you're going to marry,
I think it
I did that for
symbolized
years.
wealth in Denmark or something. If you were able to do it, it was a sign of luck. I think I remember my grandmother telling me when I was a long time ago. That I'm not completely certain on that.
No. So I suppose there's a lot of things where you put something onto your pillow and you're going to dream of the man you're going to marry or the woman, or you kind of like you go out to the cabbage field and you go with the blindfold and you pick something, and whatever size you get, it's kind of indicative of the man you'll marry. If it's a big head or if it's got a long root on it, it just means whether he's going to be big and strong, or and will have lots of money and wealth attached to him, or
super looking like a cabbage as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's not it's funny. And then I suppose there's little things like you put in the fire, maybe hair clippings or nail clippings, and you'll dream of the person. And so I suppose that's when you think about that time period. So what we said was this interstice time, this kind of liminal time. So that idea of foretelling the future and divining what your future might be. So that's very important around that time. And then, in the museum, I said we had the rings, but we also have bone apple cores. We've lovely things we've chestnut necklaces made out of chestnuts, or rose hips, and things that children would make because there's an abundance of things.
But that's a good idea for something people can do this year to kind of have a bit of an Irish inspired Halloween, is to go out and make a necklace out of rosebuds and chestnuts. Yeah. I used to make chestnut animals as well when I was a child.
Yeah, well, that's good. And we would have a thing called Conkers, which is a game where you get two big chestnuts and they'd be on a string. And basically you'd be a bit like a catapult, but two boys would kind of try to bang each other's their chestnut off the string. And whichever one broke the other one was the victor.
Whichever one fell out of the shell.
You do that? Yes.
No. Yeah. I've never actually tried that. Yeah. I'm assuming you do it with the impure conker, not the one you eat.
Yes, yeah, it's the really hard one. Yeah. So that's what they would, and it would take a long time to string your conkers. I mean, these things, when children had lots of time, it would take a long time to kind of burn a pin through it to get a string through it, and
that's a good tip. Through burn a pin to get it through. Yeah, it's a good tip.
Yeah. And
how about pumpkins? Is that Irish or is that an American thing?
No, it's definitely American for the pumpkin, because we didn't have it as a crop. But the idea of the pumpkin as a lantern comes from Ireland, definitely. And we've one on display, and it's not a real pumpkin because it came in 1943 to the National Museum, and it before it shriveled and died and decomposed. We made a model of it. I wasn't around at the time, thank God, but 43, and it was a model of what was the type that it was made. And I was talking to some.
What was it made of?
It was made of a turnip.
Okay.
And sometimes we bury large potatoes, and people use them for making them. So
probably a bit easier for us to get than turnips, to be honest.
Yes. I mean, but turnips are harder in terms of the flesh to kind of to cut. But pumpkins are kind of easy, and I suppose they're safer for kids to be cutting with a knife. So at the moment, although I met people recently, and even I did a radio interview the other day, and the man had remembered, the presenter remembered he always carved turnips because there weren't anything else to carve. But nowadays we've got the Tesco's, the Aldi's, the Lidl's, and now there's like pumpkins everywhere. You could have as many pumpkins and carve them, and lanterns. So it's almost like we sent away the tradition. So Irish people would have emigrated with that tradition. But when they get to North America, the pumpkin is easier at hand,
And it's very easy to carve. And
exactly.
It's a bit easier.
Yeah, and the reason why we had the lanterns, again, was to frighten people, and people would have either left them in the window. And, the pumpkin looks like a pumpkin, but the turnip can look a bit more skeletal, like a little skull, it has a more skull-like.
It can be more creepy.
Yes,
probably more.
it is.
Actually, when thinking, it's probably more realistic shape than a pumpkin, because a pumpkin is very round, whereas a turnip is a bit more elongated. Well, some of them are.
Yes.
So, it's a bit more realistic. So I guess that's a top tip. If you want to make a scary lantern, jack-o'-lantern, then you should do one with a turnip.
I know.
Or a potato.
Yeah, and the idea of the jack-o'-lantern, like Jack of the Lantern, I mean, it comes from a legend where Jack is kind of, and a lot of stories, it's a bit like at Halloween, a lot of the stories are that people invoke the devil for help or something, and as a result they sell their soul almost, and that's kind of what happened to Jack. He was in between God and the devil, and then he couldn't go either way. So it's like he was forced then to roam the countryside with just the light of his lantern for all eternity. He'll just be the wanderer. But Jack-o'-lantern, the legend would be also that he might lead people astray. So if you were out, you might think you see a light, but they're leading you to danger. So it's a bit like, ship's been led to danger by the maidens, singing or whatever. Yeah. So it's kind of, jack-o'-lantern could be blamed on a lot of those things where you're out at night and you do think you're lost. You see a light, but it could be a jack-o'-lantern and it could be a negative thing. So these lanterns, you carve out your turnip and then you put a light inside it. It could be a small candle, or it might be embers from the fire, and you put it on the windowsill, or you might leave it somewhere scary, like at the gateway of the house, or maybe you might even put it at the graveyard, just outside the graveyard. So that would look really scary, and anyone who's coming along, you'd be waiting to scare somebody. That would be the reason.
Fair enough. I mean, that sounds very Halloweeny still.
Yeah, and also putting it on a stick maybe and going from house to house and showing it. That would be probably it,
That sounds very
so
fun.
that's kind of, so we would have used potatoes and turnips for that. And then we would have had bonfires. And sometimes I think there's a tradition in sort of why do people have fires even in pagan times? And I think there's a connection to the sun and that light of the sun. Even if it's fire, it's bringing brightness and light. And even if you go to the main bonfire, quite often you take away a little bit of the fire to your own house, bringing that light, community light, so communal bonfires were very important. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And yeah, it does. And kind of bringing that brightness, even though it's just a piece of fire, it's still bringing the hope of light, and especially at a very dark time. So people would say, were the bonfires there really to scare away the dead? I don't think so. I think people embrace the dead. I think it's all part of that celebration of life and continuity of life, and that the other world is there. But also everything's about protection in the calendar year. It's all about Thanksgiving, protection, have a bonfire, celebrate, so that's what we would have, the bonfires. And then, of course, we've wonderful masks in the museum, and that's that idea of going around from house to house. And most of our masks, they aren't the plastic things that nowadays, they're kind of made out of, I don't know if you used flour bags, but flour bags were fabric bags that flour came in, and people invariably used them to make everything and anything. In fact, the flour companies decided that they knew people did this, so they actually would have put a dye on them that easily washed off, the name of the company, so that people would be able to use them. So our Halloween masks, a lot of them are made from flour bags, and then people have used fiber to make kind of scary eyebrows and, cut the holes out for the eyes, cut one for the mouth. We have another one where they've sewn a nose thing in, but most of the time they'd use sort of sheep's wool might be used to make the kind of fuzzy eyebrows, and maybe a mustache or something. And we've got one over there that came in from Wicklow, 1956, so it's a long time ago. And it's got coconut fibers that make up the eyes and make up the moustache. And I'm just quite amazed at how exotic that was 70 years ago.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and how do you get enough coconut fibers? They had loads of them. So even nowadays, I looked at the coconuts in the supermarket last night and they weren't that hairy. Maybe hairier coconuts existed before.
Yeah, that's a good question. Or people had a lot of time to sit and be very thorough with that. But that's lovely. But that's simply a load of traditions that people then can go out and use to celebrate Halloween this year and possibly make it a bit more Irish.
Yeah, and the nuts are really the seasonal thing. And we eat a lot of potato, and there's a Colcannon is a dish where you've mashed potato, bit of cream in it, and maybe you'd put some spring onion in and maybe some cabbage, and that would be a very popular meal around now if anyone wanted to try that.
You have it. You have your Halloween evening meal there.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you're out and about, the other people that might be out and about besides the ghosts of the dead might be the fairies, because there was an idea that the fairies. I know you have elves, and you have elves.
Terribly lot of elves and fairies in the Nordics, yeah. In Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, and Finland, and Iceland.
And you know how they have the good ones and the bad ones. So there's kind of. That's the sort of thing we would have, like quite happy with the fairies, but we kind of let them do their thing and they let us do, but they were up to mischief. If anything, if you put something down and it wasn't there, sure, of course the fairies had taken it. If you threw something outside your door, if you threw water outside, before you'd throw it, you'd be warning them. And people didn't build a house without setting down markers to say, I'm going to build here, because in case it was on a fairy path. And if the first sod was moved or the first brick was moved, then it's obviously the wrong place. So there's a great belief in the fairies and these supernatural creatures, but generally there was a belief that the fairies were moving from their summer quarters, their summer houses, to their winter dwellings, which usually were in mounds, like kind of sort of little hill mounds or circles, and so they could be on the move that night as well. So you wanted to protect yourself from them.
So it was really a night of transition then.
Yes, definitely.
Summer to winter, fairies going about, the dead coming to visit. And
exactly.
In general, a lot of people going out and about and pranking people.
I know, and the puka then was the other thing, which is kind of that mischievous kind of. He's kind of a ghostly figure, a spirit, but he's up to kind of no good. But he might take you on he might come in the form of a wild stallion or a wild little foal or something, and he might sweep you up off your feet, especially if you're coming home with a few drinks on you from the pub. If you're slightly drunk, then you definitely could bump into the puka and have a wild night, and he'll run you around the whole place, but then he'll drop you back where you were left off. So
that's at least nice. That sounds like an adventure out.
Exactly. So that's the puka, and I think Ireland has now a puka festival for Halloween in the East. But yeah, so I suppose that kind of covers a lot of our traditions, and just that going from house to house, we call that going in disguise or guising, just to frighten people. And the other thing I meant to say was that, all of our pagan festivals, a bit like St. John's Eve, is, it's near enough to a solstice. It's near enough to something that pagans were celebrating anyway. So all of the Christian festivals are often put down at exactly the times where people were celebrating anyway. And so the Christian Church have put the 1st of November as the Feast of All Saints. So the saints are the haloed ones, or the holy ones. So they've got a halo, and Halloween. So, and the word Halloween comes from halo or hallowed, which is holy.
All right.
And
that makes sense.
And so doesn't it? And the evening is evening. So it's the evening before the holy ones and the haloed ones. So that's where we get Halloween. And then that's really handy. because that's kind of the Catholic Church putting a holy day there. But the thing was, they realized we better do something about the dead here, so we might as well put the 2nd of November as the Feast of All Souls, so all of the dead. And now throughout Europe and throughout so many cultures, the Day of the Dead, is very strong as a tradition. So that is something, I suppose, that is still the remembrance throughout Europe of your departed ones through November is a really strong tradition anyway. I mean, it mightn't be Halloween, but remembrance of the dead is very strong in the wintertime. I know that a lot of countries would have these lanterns for putting on the graves around this time. There's a lot of attendance to graves in November, so. Right. Do you do that in Denmark?
We have Allehelgens Aften, which is basically All Hallows Eve. So we have something similar, very similar. But I mean, it makes sense. We were all Christian once, and then again, we were all also different religions before that. So there were a lot of them that have influenced each other, and I can definitely see paths being crossed, especially with a lot of Vikings going to Ireland. They might have brought something to you, and you definitely probably brought something back for us.
That's it. Well, very interesting. I suppose so. It'd be very nice. I mean, like, Halloween is just one of our festivals. We have St. Bridget's Day, which is the 1st of February, and the Welcome of Spring. And that's throughout Europe as well, associated again with goddesses. And I'm sure, is it the goddess Hela? There's some other gods in Nordic traditions that actually would be, and gods associated with death and goddesses. So, I mean, I think it's in there. I think we're all probably going back to some sort of more conjoined time where we were all believed in that sort of thing around the darkness and light. Definitely
the transition periods,
yeah. And look, it was really nice to talk about it, and I hope some of your visitors would come and see our folk museum. And we're here in County Mayo, so sometime they'll be able to see all our traditions.
I'm definitely going there next time I get the chance. I need to see those masks. I really want to see those different masks that you mentioned. But that was great. Yeah, thank you so very much for volunteering all your massive knowledge about Halloween. And I'm sure that people will be inspired to go out and create something that's a bit more maybe traditional, maybe more Irish, or maybe, if you know someone with a horse and cart, disassemble it and put it in between their gate. That sounds hilarious. I'd do that if I knew anyone with one. All right.
It was lovely talking to you. Goodbye, Peter. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much, Claudia.